Hey guys, NJ here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about a 3D printer. This one is the Weefun Tina 2 Plus, which will be released to market fairly soon. Now, why am I reviewing a 3D printer? Well, this isn't my first 3D printer review for any of you that have recently subscribed. And to stay on topic a bit, they go hand in hand with drones. I mean, printing parts for drones, printing parts for any kind of hobby stuff, let alone the other kind of utilities you can make use of, like parts for your, it could be parts for your car, it could be parts for your vacuum cleaner. They really have so much use, and I think every household at some point in the future will have a 3D printer in it. They really are a fantastic little piece of technology. But I did review the Ender 3 back when they first came out, just as things were becoming affordable in 3D printing, the very first version of that. And engineer minded as I am, had to set about fixing a lot that was wrong with it to get it into a good state, and I did, and it prints fantastically now. In fact, my good pal Andy Kirby has that printer now and is still getting plenty of use today in printing as well as the day it left here. I was then sent from Creality. They then got in touch because I bought that with my own money. They then got in touch and said, can we send you a CR10S Pro? And I had the single worst experience ever out of the box with that printer. It was horrible, and it's the printer I still have today. And the reason for that is because, again, I went through everything that was wrong with it and I fixed everything that was wrong with it and made it absolutely spot on, and it's been brilliant ever since. That's kind of the good thing with printing, is once you get it all good, it's just set and forget. But getting to that point back in the early days was an absolute nightmare. So this intrigued me when Weefun got in touch with me and said, look, we got this new Tina 2 Plus, would you be interested in checking it out? And I thought, well, the one reason I didn't do any more 3D printer reviews was they're just so big. You know, they're huge, great things if you want a decent build volume to print usable stuff. And space is a premium. I can't just collect these things and take up all the space in my studio. So knowing this was small, that got my attention. It's not the classic kind of lots of extruded metal beams and that kind of gantry setup. There's a lot of plastic in this. But the bit that caught my eye when they got the fishing rod and cast it out to us creators, the bit that caught my eye was the 250 millimeters a second without compromising quality. And I thought, is this thing a tiny linear rail printer? Like, since when can 250 millimeters a second be possible from something like this? So anyway, they got my interest and I said, okay, send it. I'll have a look at it. And it's here. And before I sort of move forward, just for those of you that don't want to hang around for me talking about this for the next 25 minutes or so, it's a decent printer and it actually prints at speed pretty damn well. 250 millimeters a second. Not that I would, I mean, I don't know why I would ever want, other than like a super draft of something that I just want to see basically what something looks like. It will technically do it, but the hot end really can't keep up. We'll talk more about it as we go. Anyway, I'm going to bring you closer in so you can have a look at the printer, and then I'll go through all the things that I've done to it. I haven't had to do much, but there are a few things that need doing on this printer that I think are worth doing. But generally out of the box, this thing's pretty good. Let's go in and have a look at it. So let's have a little close look at the Tina 2 Plus by Weefun. So you can see this is, as I said, very unlike your kind of traditional, lots of extruded aluminium parts setup. This is more of a little plastic enclosure. The build volume is very small, so we're talking 10 centimeters across, 11 centimeters deep and 10 centimeters tall. That said, there's plenty you can do with that. It's still very, very functional, and you can print a lot of cool parts within a small build space, especially if you're first getting into 3D printing. It's kind of ideal really, especially because it's so small. But anyway, you've got this plastic enclosure. The other thing I like about plastic enclosures, they kind of keep the temperature a little more contained, a little more consistent, which often will really help aid in good quality printing. In fact, there's no reason why you couldn't put a Perspex door over the front and the back if you really wanted to go for it on getting this even more temperature consistent. In here we've got a dual slider for the bed. It is a fixed bed, it's not on springs. And it does have a magnetic plate, you can see here, which does a perfectly good job keeping things adhered, although I always use 3D lac. Anyone who's been printing for any amount of time knows a quick spray of 3D lac and absolutely anything will stick to it. But yeah, the plate magnetically sits on there and it's flexible, so it's much easier to pop your parts off once they're done. But that sits on there and slides on two sliding rails here. If I tilt that forward a bit, you can see these two rails. It slides up and down on that. Now, just quickly on that note, mine out of the box had a bit of wobble to it, right? It's now pretty solid, but when I was doing that with my finger, it was rattling. And under here, you can see there are 4 mounting screws, and those are for the plastic mounts with the, I think they're brass inserts that basically go around these rails to hold it true. And what I had to do was loosen those and actually push them in slightly and then retighten them, and that took all the wobble out. So that's something you may find you need to do, you may not, but that's something that you do get with the inconsistencies of plastic form stuff. It might always have a little bit of play in there. And obviously if we're talking about a printer that wants to print nice and fast, as this one does a pretty decent job of that, you want to basically eliminate any kind of play, sideways wobble in that bed. So that little mod, and that was good, and that's a few seconds to do, so I don't consider that a deal breaker at all. You can also see we've got a level sensor and then a fan here. I'll talk more about the fan in a minute. But this level sensor, it does a 9-point sensing. Now on a build volume this small, it doesn't really matter that much to have a level sensor, to be honest with you. 9 points, plenty. I mean, I didn't think this was going to be a problem with its leveling at all, and it wasn't. First layer right across the bed was fantastic, again straight out of the box. So it does a 9-point measurement by default. The only thing that I will say is that because of the confinement of the space here, when this thing is all the way off to the left, the hot end's all the way off to the left of the gantry, where it will, you know, actually print on this edge of the bed, it's taking a measurement because of the offset to the nozzle. The measurement is from here, so those 9 points are actually of this part. So it's not actually getting measurements down this left edge. But as I said and suspected, it really didn't make any difference anyway. Something this small, you're not going to get bed level inconsistency really. You'd have to be pretty unlucky. And with the level sensor, it all does a perfectly fine job. So you don't have to worry about that first layer problem with this printer. And then of course you can adjust the offset in the settings, which is dealt with on the top. There's an LCD, a rotary dial with a push button on the top, and all very easy. And that's also at the top where you've got a slot for your SD card, which they include with some test prints. Round to the side, you can see we have a little fold down arm here, and you can see where the extruder is mounted. The motor's on the other side, and then this is all a fairly standard affair in terms of feed. The roll that will go on, you will want to, I've got a little roll of TPU here, but you would put your roll on like that and you would go in on the underside. So that's the way. Now the problem obviously then, which you have, is it will not fit, excuse my arms in the way for 1 second, it absolutely will not fit a kilo roll on there. You can see we are not tall enough to do that, so you'd have to either hang this off the edge or go onto Thingiverse and find an adapter mount to bring an arm up here so that you can put something on. I mean, that's just, with something this small, unfortunately that's just where we are. There's not much that can be done about that. And then as we move around to the right side, that is where you can do a USB connection into your computer. Although this does use wireless, you have to configure the wireless with the Polo Print app, and they give you QR codes on the top here for all of that stuff. And yeah, that worked absolutely fine, configured to my network, and then it was seen by the Weefun builder slicer that they suggest you use with this. They do have a Cura profile if you prefer to use Cura, by the way, but I couldn't get Cura to see this printer on the network. It was only visible by its own Weefun software, which I think is kind of a condensed version of Cura anyway, and it has enough settings to kind of get this printing well that I wasn't too upset there wasn't all the full Cura settings that I normally want in something like that. You get a fairly standard laptop style brick power supply with an on-off switch halfway down it. I would like to have seen a right angle jack here, because this thing kind of plugs in on the side like so, and I don't know, I just feel like that's a bit, you know, a bit of a hazard stuck out like that, and it's not good for strain relief. I think a right angle adapter for that would have been a more sensible idea, but yeah, as I said, no massive deal breaker. Let's just power her on. It does have internal lighting as well up at the top here, where you can see where the main board is. If I tip this up, you should be able to see it just there. Yeah, so you've got your down lights there, which does a good job actually. Oh, feet have come off. This was one of the first things that I printed, was some feet which are actually available on Thingiverse, to just raise this thing up a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of a little look around the printer, and you can see the slightly peculiar setup with the belt drive here. It's got the stepper motor right in the middle at the back there, and then two kind of tensioner bearings here, but they're proper bearings. There's no bushings there. It's all very, very smooth. Everything feels good. And the Z screw was properly lubricated. It is only one Z screw, but again, it's braced kind of across quite a deep gantry on those, and you've got brass sliders on the other side of that, so it holds its shape really well, and with the bed leveling, there's not much to complain about there. That all just works. I'll give you a quick look at the display here. So you can see I'm connected to my Wi-Fi network here. It gives you some basic information on the screen. It will give you your nozzle temperature, bed temperature, so we're 26 on both at the minute. The fact there's an SD card inserted, and then going through the menu, you have quite a lot of useful stuff in terms of preparing. You can change your filament. It does, if you go to change filament, it asks to preheat to either PLA, TPU or PETG, and the temperatures are pretty spot on for those three types. And then it does a good job with the loading and unloading as well. That was a really nice thing to see. There was no issue with that at all. And then you do have homing, move axis, level bed, end stops, disable steppers. And then in the main, we've also got control, temperature, probe Z offset. I didn't need to mess with that at all. I think I did slightly with TPU. I needed to raise it slightly off the bed, but very easy to do. Language, LED control, so you can turn the internal LED off if you want. We then have power loss recovery mode, fairly standard these days. Smart temperature. Now that's an interesting thing. So the smart temperature, basically it's got an ambient temperature sensor, and if it sees the temperature in the room move around, it kind of adjusts the bed and nozzle temperature accordingly to adjust for those things, I believe. I have seen the temperatures move around a little bit, so I think that's what it's doing. It seems to be doing a good job, so I'm not going to turn that off. You've also got firmware update, which I believe is done. You could do it via the SD card. It can also be done via the app. And they have a Wi-Fi firmware update, restore defaults, and then in advanced settings, it does warn you for experienced users only. We move over from there. Contrast, you can then go into a bit more of the nuts and bolts of this. Now the max speed in millimeters per second was set at 150, so if you cranked everything up to 250 in Cura and it wasn't doing it, that's why you need to come in and actually set the X and Y to be able to go up to 250 millimeters a second, and then you've obviously got the Z speed and the extruder speed, etc. So there's a few decent advanced settings there, which is pretty good. Other than that, you go acceleration, jerk, probe offset, filament. So there's quite, you can go quite deep just straight off of there. And then we can also print from TF card, and this is where you have all the ones that come with it. It does come with a roll of kind of fairly generic PLA, and you can print some of these included models, and they come out decently, but they're always super optimized to look great straight out the box, and these were no exception. I was more interested to see how this thing printed once I'd put a model in there and put the settings that I wanted on there. Now, one thing that I didn't particularly like, which I shall show you, and this is one modification I made, is the fact, well, there's two mods that I'll talk about, but the first one is the fact that the fan on this is an absolute tornado. And I guess, I mean, to be fair, if you're going to be printing fast on this, if you're going to be pushing filament through this quickly, then you need lots of cooling, because you've got to lay it and cool it as quickly as possible. You need high fan speed for that. I don't know that anyone would buy a kind of a budget end printer to do that. It's a bit of a strange thing to offer, but either way, the fan is an absolute tornado. Now that there's a ton of air coming out of there, but that is so unnecessarily loud and so unnecessarily fast. Now let me just, I'm gonna have to stop that again now, I think. So it's so noisy that I don't think we're going to be able to talk much, are we? It's too much. That's for most printing that you'll be doing, and for the speed that you'll want to print for good quality prints, this thing is just blowing an absolute gale. It doesn't need to be going that mad. And if you're printing things like TPU, for me, I never want to run the fan speed as fast as that, because in fact the finish of something like, oh, there we go, so much better. The finish of TPU can be affected by how quickly you cool it as well, especially if you're working with like a translucent color, like this particular luminous green TPU that I've been using, which is excellent, by Sane Smart. So one modification I made was that I fitted a step down onto this. Now I can just disconnect this, and actually I'll leave it connected so you've got some light. I got a very cheap, for a few quid on Amazon, and I'll link it in the description, a DC step down, which will take anything up to 24 volts and step it down to whatever you want. I'll bring that a bit closer for you, and I basically wired an in and an out to go between the fan line and the fan itself, and then there's a little pot here which allows me to adjust the basically turn the voltage down to the fan, and therefore slow the fan down. Now I know a lot of you might be thinking, well, why can't you do that in software? No matter what I did with the G-code, the fan does not respond to commands for speed. So I did ask Weefun, I said, are you going to release a firmware update where the fan will have some control over its speed? Because when I print with this, I want to be able to run the fan slower depending on what I'm printing and how fast I'm printing. To which they were kind of, I mean, they were a bit non-specific. They said, we can't tell you when there's going to be a firmware update regarding the fan. I don't know if that means it can't do it from a hardware point of view, or whether they just haven't coded it in. But for me, I can't use this unless this thing's quieter. It's just too noisy and it's blowing out too much air. So I fitted that little step down. I could do a video on how to do that at some point down the road. Very, very easy though. And now I've got that running at a much slower speed when I want it to, by just turning that down. And in fact, let me quickly show you that. There we go. And I'm just going to now turn this clockwise to reduce the voltage. There we go. So much better. And that's really where the fan should be sitting for most 40 to 60 mil a second prints, and it's still blowing out absolutely tons of air, and I don't have to scream over the top of it to be heard, and that isn't going to be obtrusive while that's going and printing something in a corner. The other thing that I will mention is this is a Bowden tube setup, and the actual stuff that you get with it looks something like this. This kind of generic, not particularly great Bowden tube, and the tolerances on the inside diameter of this, often in this cheap stuff, isn't very good. Now there's two problems with the stuff that came with it. One was it's this pretty cheap rubbish stuff. Two, there was just way too much of it. It was a huge loop. And the problem is when you're pushing filament, especially something like TPU, through a Bowden tube, and it's not got great tolerances inside of there, that 175 mil filament, you'll find that it will tend to bind up. And when you're, it's like pushing rope, TPU. When you try and push it, because it's flexible, as you can see here, this stuff is super flexible. If it's allowed to move around, what you end up happening is this: you end up getting this bowing, and it'll often want to escape out of this side of the extruder here. It'll come out like a knot, kind of like this. So there's two things you can do to improve that. One of which is to switch out to some Capricorn tube, which is very cheap on Amazon. It's good stuff. And the second thing is to shorten that tube down. Now, just in the essence of speed, you shouldn't really do this, but the stepper motors are off. I'm just going to push this down. There we go, and move this across. So that's kind of the furthest across point, and the lowest point at which this is going to be in terms of its distance to where the top of the extruder is. And you can see we've got this nice bow all the way down there, and it's not longer than it needs to be. Okay, on both sides you can see that amount of tube is all you need. You don't need a huge loop out the top of excess Bowden tube. That just adds to your retraction problem when you're printing something like TPU. So a quick fix will be to shorten this down. A much better fix is to get some high tolerance Capricorn tube, which will do a much better job. And now I can run retractions at like 6.5–7mm with TPU if I need, and it doesn't bind up in here. If I'd have done that as it came out of the box, well, it did. It bound up when I was at 4mm of retraction. It was already escaping out the side of the extruder. Now I'm at 6.5mm with zero problems with TPU escaping. Don't have these problems on a direct drive, but obviously our extruder is Bowden setup. So there's another little quick tip to make things better. But that's kind of it, right? That's all I did mod wise. That was a 10-second fix, just tightening up the screws to stop the play in the bed. Yours might be fine out the box anyway. The Capricorn tube, 10-second fix. And then the other thing I did, just because I can't stand that being at full blast and just too noisy, was I wired in a step down. Honestly, that's not a real big thing to do. And it may get solved in a firmware update. But for me, anyway, it might not bother you. It just bothers me. I don't need it printing with that fan speed. I just think it's just makes the whole thing sound a bit too noisy. One other thing I did say, I printed these little feet. Now this was printed on it, and I don't know if you can see the quality of the print, but seriously, look at that. Absolutely gorgeous printing. The layer lines are great, the walls are nice and clean. This was printed about, I think this was about 50 ms, and it did just an exceptionally good job. Really, really beautiful printing TPU. That was just a single layer, so you can see exactly how beautiful and uniform a single layer is in TPU. So that first layer was excellent. I have also here some drone parts that I've been printing. This is a little edge protector for my drone. Come on camera, focus. Again, look at the uniformity and how clean that printed up. Really, really good. So I'm very, very impressed with how it's printed TPU. In terms of PLA, there was a couple of things I printed here. These are just a pair of kind of clamps. I did one at ultra fine quality at a slower speed, which printed up very well. Again, that's the bottom layer. There's the top layer. That was very nice. And then I printed one at the 150 millisecond, and I tell you what, it also did a pretty good job. So can it print at 150 milliseconds? Yeah, it can. And it did a pretty decent job, all things considered. So yeah, this actually does a decent job up at the higher speeds. I've got very little to complain about. In terms of printing PLA, yeah, same thing. These were printed in PETG and did an absolutely great job. And the tensions were all set up really well. No complaints about that. Belt tensions were spot on straight out of the box. And yeah, the only other little mod I say, print those feet, lift it off. Not only just having less contact with the ground tends to quieten it down a bit more. I think it's also just a better idea because you've got the other thing that is getting hot under there. The stepper drivers down the bottom here. You got the Z screw stepper driver and you got the Y, and I think it's good to have those clear of the ground anyway, and a little bit of airflow getting under to those. That's no bad thing. But yeah, on the whole, this is a good little printer. I've been very impressed with it. Other than those mods and the question mark over whether they're going to be adding firmware to update and allow you to control the speed of the fan on the hot end, it's pretty good. Now, the one last thing I do need to talk about, and this is probably something that I do think could be a make or break on this, and that is the hot end. Now, the hot end does a pretty good job. When I say hot end, I'm talking about this, the nozzle and sort of hot end of whatever this, I mean, it's kind of a combined thing, but this is what it comes with a spare one in the box, but this is what we're talking about. This is a molded part. There is no unscrewing and replacing this nozzle. If you want a new nozzle, you have to buy this whole piece. How much this is going to cost, I don't know. Judging by the prices of their other hot end parts for their previous printers, they all seem to be about £10, something like that. You know, if you were to just buy it, if they would just use a standard nozzle, you can buy a big pack of them for that. You know, this might turn some people off of it, because this hot end, it is just brass. I did get that confirmed. It's not a hardened steel, and I think they should switch to hardened steel, especially if they're going with a proprietary nozzle hot end like this. And the connector for these, which I presume has the this will be carrying the heating element, it almost looks like the inside of a USB. You know, this is a little bit, for me, a little bit of a bugbear. Not terribly thrilled about that. It does a good job, and up at 250 mil or over 150 millisecond, at 150 millisecond, this is keeping up. So, you know, I can't say it's bad, but I just hate the fact that when that nozzle wears out, you've got to then only buy these as a replacement. So I hope they make them cheap and they're plentiful in their availability, because you get one spare in the box, and after that you've got to hope they have them in stock, because you'll need to buy a few of these. Like I said, Weefun, make a hardened nozzle version of this, not just brass. If these last longer, I'll have less of a problem with it. But it's fairly easy to change out. You unclip, this has 4 plastic clips on it to take the shroud off, and then there's a button that you push at the back, and this just drops straight out. But yeah, not thrilled about that. But, you know, that said, it all just prints great. The prints that came off it at speed were great. The slow prints were really good. So yeah, as a printer, as a small budget but very high quality and fast printer, I'm impressed. I'm impressed. The Weefun Tina 2 Plus does get a thumbs up from me. But yeah, you know everything I know now, and we'll see if there's more to update on this at some point. I'll come back with another video, but until then, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all again soon.